Okay, I think this is recording, and I wanted to show you how to make this very fun flip flap card, or some people call it a pull tab card. And this card design was demonstrated by a lady in the North Carolina Demos group on Facebook. She was part of a stamp along that we had in November. Her name is Jo Anne Hewins. And she really just did an amazing job going through and telling folks and showing folks how to make this card. And when you pull on the tab, a small card pops open. When you push the tab back in, that card closes. The pieces that are used for this card are pretty basic. We have a 1-layer piece in the back. I'm going to use the exact same colors and design, so it's easy to follow along. This is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. It is one sheet. Essentially, it's a quarter of a sheet of standard 8 1/2 by 11 cardstock, and I'm using crumb cake. The first layer that we have on the background is early espresso. That's the frame. That is cut to 3 1/2 by 4 3/4. And then I used a piece of designer series paper from the Poinsettia Place collection. And that's cut just a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter than the early espresso. It is 3 3/8 by 4 5/8. The small card on the front, and what I mean by the small card is the piece that opens and closes, is made up of 2 pieces of crumb cake cardstock. The one on the left, I'll call that the front of the small card, and the back are 2 different sizes. They're both 3 7/8 inches long, but the small one in the middle is 2 inches wide. The larger piece that is on the front is 2 1/2 inches wide. So these are those pieces. I've already stamped the sentiments, and I use the Gnome for the Holidays stamp set for all the stamps that I've used for this card. I love this set, too much fun. And again, the front of the small card is 2 1/2 by 3 7/8. You can leave the small card with cardstock. This will work perfectly fine, and you'll see that when we go through and we make the mechanism. I decided for my card that I wanted just a little bit more design. And so what I did is I took a piece of the designer series paper. Again, it's from the Poinsettia Place collection. And I cut it to the exact same size as the front of the small card, 2 1/2, 3 7/8. These are the exact same size. And on that front piece, I stamped a couple of images from the Gnome for the Holidays set. I used the tree, and I used one of the elves. And I purposely stamped so that that hat is intentionally going over the top of the tree. And when you see how I finished that on the front using some paper piecing, it really doesn't matter, because I'm actually going to fussy cut some pieces from another piece of cardstock, and I'm going to layer that on top of the hat, and it will look like the hat is in front of the tree. But I went ahead and I stamped everything on my pieces, because what I really wanted to show you is how to put the mechanism together. The mechanism itself, the piece that is going to be used to create the pull tab, I chose to use the same color as the back of the frame piece. This is early espresso. It's 2 inches by 6 inches. And this is going to give us the mechanism. So to do the mechanism, there are 3 pieces that you're going to need. The others you can set aside. The three pieces are the background, the frame, the designer series paper. So if I bring out the card that I did, I'm focusing on these two pieces. And then I also want to work with the mechanism piece, the 2x6. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to glue the designer series paper onto the frame piece. And I don't need to get a lot of glue. I just want to make sure that this is going to stay on the background. And then I am going to punch a hole through both layers of this combination. So I'm going to go ahead and just put these two pieces together and try to get it as straight as I can. And I'm going to use the classic label punch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the punch in on the long side. And I am going to put that punch in as far as I can. It's not quite in the middle. It really doesn't matter. But I'm putting that in as far as I can go. And then I'm going to try to get either side outside the punch to be about the same in terms of distance from the edge. And honestly, if it's a little bit different, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to go ahead and punch that out. So I'm going to end up with a piece. If I put this behind, you'll be able to see better, that has a hole cut out in the middle. The most important thing when you're making this kind of card that you're going to put a mechanism through is if you don't have the punch that I just used, just make sure that the hole is wide enough so that that 2-inch piece is going to go through without a problem. That's really the big deal. So if you wanted to use an X-Acto knife, or if you have a die, or something that's going to give you a nice area that's about, I'd say, 1/4 of an inch wide and a little bit over 2 inches long, so that you can get that piece of paper in, you're fine. We're going to set this aside and we're going to start working on the mechanism. And what you're going to do with this piece is put it into a scoring board with the 6 inches on the top. And you're going to score this at 2 places. You're going to score it at 2 inches and 2.5 inches. And this is actually building the mechanism. The piece that is going to be on this is really now 3.5 inches from that score line. This is the edge where you can put a decorative cut if you want. This is the piece that will actually be for the pull tab. And what I did for mine is I used the Delightful tag topper because that gave me this really pretty kind of scalloped finish. And to do that, I am going to use my tag topper punch, and I'm putting this in so the longest side from the score line. So I've got the 2 inches from the edge where I scored on the left, and I'm putting the longer side in to my punch. Just going to put it all the way in, give it a nice punch, and now I've got a pretty little decorative edge that I can use when I've got my pull tab done. And again, if you don't have one of the tag topper punches, don't worry. Grab a die. You can even fussy cut however you want. You can put a nice little trim on the side, or you can leave it square. It's really up to you as far as how you decorate that. So now let's build our mechanism. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to burnish this piece. And I am going to fold it. So if I'm looking at the scalloped edge on my right and the score line that's closest to that, I'm going to pull that up and I'm going to burnish that. And then the next score line, which was at that 2-inch, I'm going to pull that up and I'm going to burnish again. Essentially, you're going to end up with, if you turn it this way, something that kind of looks like the letter J. And this is the piece that is the pull tab. So what's going to happen is we're going to put this through the hole. So imagine that I have threaded this through the hole. I'll do that in a minute. We're going to adhere the paper to this so that when it's laying flat, both pieces of the small card are laying flat. And when I pull the tab and the piece on the left moves, it's going to open up the front of that small card. What that means is we need to attach the mechanism to the base of the card. So if you place the mechanism kind of like this, and I'll show you how I'm going to align this in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and grab my base just so I can show you there's something behind. What I want to be able to do when I've got this in is I know that this piece is 2.5 inches wide. Remember, I scored at 2 inches and at 2.5. So the width of this piece with the score in the middle or score on the side is 2.5 inches wide. Well, the front of my little card is 2.5 inches wide. So what I want to try to do, if I can, and again, don't say bad things about yourself, is I'm going to try and get this mechanism to stay on here so that I have the same amount of designer series paper showing on the right as I do on the left. And if I can get that kind of close, what that's going to do is it's going to center that small card on the front of the designer series paper. And again, if it's not perfect, that's okay. The way we're going to do this is we need to attach this piece to the front of the card, because the piece that you can see right here is right underneath the small part of the card. And this small part is not moving. It is staying put. So what we need to do is we need to get this piece, this corner, attached to the designer series paper. The best way to do that and the strongest way to get your mechanism to actually stay is to use tear and tape. So what I like to do at this point is I'm just going to open this up and kind of turn it. I'm going to have an opportunity to get it perfectly aligned in just a minute. And I'm just going to put a piece of tear and tape right at the edge. And I'm going to make sure that that wax paper is going to come off pretty easily. I always just kind of burnish the tear and tape, and then the wax paper tends to come off a little bit easier. I recommend that you put one more piece of tear and tape. And again, use your bone folder. Give that a good burnish, and then take the tape off. So what we want to do, this bottom piece is not attached, but what we want to do is get this as close to centered as we can. And I'm holding the right side up that has the tear and tape on it. I'm not putting that onto the paper just yet. I'm visually trying to get it kind of in the middle. And I'm also on the left, trying to make sure that that left piece is fairly straight. And then I'm going to go ahead and push that down. So now my mechanism is attached to that front. Watch what happens when I pull the tab and I push the tab. The mechanism is now working. Now the trick is to just get the pieces attached. And let's kind of think about this. We have two pieces that we need to attach to the mechanism. This is the inside piece. It is purposely the width from that score line to the end. It's 2 inches long. This piece is purposely 2.5 inches long because it is going to attach to the left side and it is going to line up on the right. So what I need to do, and let's just look at the top and look at how it's attached to the mechanism. We're going to attach that top piece on the part that is scored on that tab. So we're going to attach the top piece right to this little part that has a 1/2 inch between those two score lines. And the way we're going to do that, again, is with tear and tape. It is the best thing to use because it's definitely strong. And the people that you send these cards to are going to go completely nutty and they're going to use the mechanism over and over. And the stronger you make this, the more likely it is that it is going to just hold up. Now, I do recommend that you put another piece, but be very careful. You don't want to put the other piece of tear and tape below the score line. You want this piece to move with the hinge. So when you do that, just be careful. Align the tear and tape so that you can see where you're placing the bottom and make sure that you don't put it past that score line. And you can give that another burnish and take off that paper. Okay. So we are going to take our front piece of the small card. Again, this is 2.5 by 3 7/8. And what I'm going to do is I know I need to align the left side of that piece with the edge of this mechanism. I also want to try to get it sort of centered top and bottom. And just like I often do, I'm going to stand up and I'm just going to align that on the side so I can see where the side is. I'm not pressing it down just yet. I'm going to try and get it kind of centered top and bottom. Again, I'm not saying bad things about myself. And then I'm going to go ahead and press that down. And then I'm going to test that mechanism again. And look what happens. That front is now opening. So the last piece that I need to do is I need to attach the inside. And what's nice about this is I have a very good visual guide of where I need to put this piece. I know that the bottom part of the mechanism is the width. I know that the other piece of the card is the height. So if I put this piece on and I do top and bottom aligned and I get the edge over to the edge of my mechanism, I should be good to go. And what I'm going to do on this is, no surprise, I'm going to use a couple pieces of tear and tape. And let me just bring the finished one back in. What you're going to notice is that if I were to tilt this so you could see the mechanism on the bottom, this piece, the second small piece, is attached on both sides. So I've really tried to put some tear and tape here and here so that it will lay as flat as it can, and it will make it stronger. What that looks like when you're putting this in is you're going to put a piece, you're not going to tear your paper like I just did. I'll put tear and tape on there so it will be okay. So I'm going to put tear and tape there. I'm going to add an extra piece, which is perfectly fine, to get that to lay a little bit flat. Grab a pair of scissors just so I don't get tape outside the mechanism. I don't want it to attach to anything else. And I'm also going to put a piece down at the bottom because I want that front piece to really, really stay. And I am going to take the wax paper off. Let's see if I can get this one up from underneath. You should be able to. Yep. And then I am going to take the smaller inside piece. And again, I'm just going to kind of look at this from the top. I know visually where I need to put that on the left side. I'm getting it as lined up as I can, top and bottom. And then when I lay it down, I won't see the right side since it's the same width as the mechanism. So now let's just test this. Pushing it in, pulling it out, and it's working. So the last things that you're going to do with this card is really mostly assembly. We're going to take the base, which was a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, a quarter of a piece of standard cardstock. That's the back piece. If you wanted to put this onto a card that opens, absolutely that will work. And what I did on my card is I'm going to just put it down onto the card front. But before I do that, I am going to first put a little bit of ribbon into the hole. It's a little bit easier to put the ribbon in before you put the front down onto the actual card base. And I just pulled out some early espresso ribbon that I have in my stash. Anything will work. You can use baker's twine, ribbon, embossing floss would work well. It's really up to you. And you can also decide how you want to thread your ribbon through. And let me tell you what I mean when I get this on. You have an option of which side you have the little kind of knot in your ribbon. And I like to put mine so that it shows on the front. Some people prefer that it is on the back. I don't suggest that you cut off the tails just yet. I suggest that you kind of wait and see where you place your card, and that will dictate a little bit of how much of a tail you may want to keep on the actual pull. And then you're going to attach your framed piece and your little card to the front of your card. Now, you can align this however you like. you can center the frame. So I'm looking at the early espresso piece and centering that on the actual back piece. Or I could purposely pull it over a little to the left so that the pull tab is a little bit more in the middle. One thing to keep in mind is when you put this card into an envelope, you're going to have to tuck the ribbon because it is going to go outside that 4 1/4 inch measurement. So you definitely are going to have to do just a little bit of tucking. So it's really up to you where you put this. But the most important thing to keep in mind when you attach this piece, do not put glue on any of the mechanism that is going to move. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pull it. So when you put this piece onto your card front, you definitely want to give it some good adhesive. You could use tear and tape on this. That is another way to get this to stick. But you can see that I am absolutely intentionally not putting any glue at all on the piece that is going to move. That is completely left unglued. And then I'm going to go ahead and I am just going to try to center this as much as I can. And go ahead and adhere that down. It's a good idea to turn it over and just give it a nice little burnish with your hand so that the adhesive is starting to do its magic. And then you can decide how you want to cut your ribbon, what kind of tails you want to give it, and just cut that off however you want to do that. And there's your card. I'll show you in just a second what I did to embellish the front. And you can again check and make sure everything is working. If you pull on this, because I have no glue behind this piece, it is moving freely and I'm able to easily open and close that card. I decided, like I said before, that I wanted to add a little bit more, to me, a little bit more kind of fun to the front of the card. And you can stamp on this piece before you attach it. You can do whatever you like. This can definitely be the front of the card with some really pretty embellishments. I just decided I was going with more of a textured theme. I wanted more wood sort of green. So as I've already mentioned, I took a piece of designer series paper, the exact same size as the front of the card. This is 2.5 by 3 7/8. And I did the stamping for my images. And to do the paper piecing, you have to have a little patience. This does take time. I think it's worth it. You may find it relaxing. You may not. Up to you. But what you're going to see is I had some scrap pieces of cardstock. And I put specific parts of the stamped images onto those scraps. I wanted a red door, so I made sure that on part of a piece of cherry cobbler, I had a door. I wanted a green hat. There's the hat. I wanted, as crazy as this sounds, to have the part of the glass on the door to be in yellow. So I made sure I had that. The ornament, I wanted it to be slightly yellow. And then the beard, I wanted to be gray. So what I did for each of these is I got out my watercolor pencils and I have both of the sets. I just spread out all the pencils onto my work area and I started coloring. And I used some gray and some brown on the beard, colored directly onto the piece of cardstock that I'd stamped on. I messed around with adding some different greens to the hat, added some blue and gray to the ornament. The door, I just put a little bit of, I think it was white or gray on the edge, and I colored the knob a little bit of a gray. I didn't do much to the window, kind of left it alone. And then I also went in and I colored the tree, the grass, the leaves, the ornament, the rocks, and the little bow here. And I think that's mistletoe. I'm not really sure. It definitely doesn't look like mistletoe now because it's green rather than green and white. Colored in his little nightie and his sandals, and used some different textures and blending with some of the actual watercolor. To do the paper piecing, what you do is, if let's pretend that this is colored, this part of the beard is colored. Once you're happy with how you've colored it, you literally take your scissors and you're going to fussy cut around what you want to put onto the image. So this gray was first colored and then I cut it out. And because I stamped the image onto this piece, it's like putting a piece of a puzzle into the puzzle. You know exactly where that image needs to go. And I just simply put a little bit of glue on the back and I put that straight down onto where I had stamped. Same thing with the hat, the ornament, the door, and the window. And I just played around with some of the coloring until I liked what I had. And that's it. So a cute little flip, flap, or pull tab card, whatever you care to call it, with a fun gnome Christmas and a little Christmas wish, and then inside holly jolly everything. Now, as far as using this as a card or using this design as a card, you might be sort of thinking about where you would put your sentiment. And maybe two options with this design. You have a little area inside the front card, actually probably on both sides, that you could write on. You could also flip this over and you could write on the back. So there definitely are areas. If you wanted to make this a card on a card and you used a true card base, you could open this up and you would have the inside of a card to write your greeting on as well. But I hope you try this. It really is a lot of fun. There are a lot of possibilities, just like with many, many designs for different occasions. And once you have that mechanism down, you've got a blank slate to do whatever you want. So enjoy, and I hope you learned a new design that you will use.